You know what I realized during that?
What is that?
There is no sound.
Oh.
There's no audio when you do just that image, but we're live.
It's like an emergency broadcast, just scrolls across, tornado coming, beep beep,
Yeah.
like.
Well, the worst part about StreamYard is you can't control the volume of the videos that you upload.
Oh.
So there's not like a way that I can say, hey, like this video is too loud, like just not like cap at minus 6 dB, like a hard limiter. So I'm always worried that I'm like versus the level we're talking at, and then if I do an intro, it could just be like, oh god. Anyways, actually, there we go. So today's topic are coding boot camps worth it? And the funny thing is, I want to start with the fact that, you know, my wife, who actually went to a boot camp, brought up the fact that neither of us have gone to boot camps and that maybe we're not the best people to talk about it. But I told her, I was like, listen, from the other side of working with people who come from boot camps and being on teams with so many different people, I'm sure we can come to some sort of conclusion on our opinions on boot camps from afar and whatnot. So I'm going to start with you. You have a lot of opinions on this. So
my opinion is just there's two things. The thing you just mentioned about like we've worked with a lot of people. I haven't really worked with someone who's come out of a boot camp. I've worked with people who are self-taught and they've taken the long approach of self-teaching, putting together some kind of syllabus for themselves, whether it be like mimicking university syllabus or whatever. But I haven't really met anyone who's done I learned to code through a boot camp and that was all I did. It could have been, or I haven't, but I'm sure there are people who've used it as like a seed to carry on and do their own studies or things like that. But I have worked with people who just bootstrapped themselves from scratch. No boot camp, nothing. And they've done great. So I'm not saying that universities are essential, but it just seems like boot camps, the advertising material I see from boot camps is what really sort of gets me a little triggered. It seems to be this, pay us a huge amount of money, we will train you for 10 weeks or whatever it might be, or 3 months, and you can get a job. And what do they mean? What kind of job are they prepping people for? How have they taken 3 years of formal study or effort and condensed it into 3 months? That's the thing. It feels like they're not being completely open and disclosing like what the expectations are. You have an awareness, you have perhaps a feel for like what the tech terrain is like, what all the things are, but you probably don't have a good enough grasp unless you, I don't know, didn't sleep during the 3 months when you were doing the boot camp and like committed to it fully. But I don't know, it seems very expensive for what you get. And I'm not convinced at this point that I'm seeing people come out of it with incredibly impressive skill sets for the amount of time they've taken.
I have worked with a couple of people who've gone through boot camps. I will say they have not been great successes. Like I think for 1 out of maybe every 10 are like, okay, you're you're beyond what I would expect. And then another 1 out of 10 are like maybe 2 out of 10 are average or you meet par, and at least 7 out of 10 just like no, like a lot of companies I will say will just hire because of just how cheap the individual is in comparison to whatever, and they factor in that in the cost of like, okay, if you're half of the cost of what I'd have to go pay for a developer, even a new grad, and it's going to take me 1 year to ramp you up to where you need to be. That's still probably net because I can hire 2, and in a year, now I will have 2 people who are equivalent to 2 new grads, and it does tax the team, obviously, like that's the indirect cost. But if you have the capacity to do that, then it's a win-win for the company. And I mean, it's win for the people who do the coding bootcamp because now they have a year of experience. And once you've gone beyond that, I feel like you have the reputation there, like the badge of honor to say, like, look, I didn't just do a boot camp. I've actually worked somewhere. So
yep.
But I do think like right now, there is too many that try and play into this, I don't know, storytelling that like you're going to finish this and you're hireable at that point. And there is like a small truth to it, as in, can you get hired for a job? Yes. The rest comes down to like, how motivated are you going to be once you're hired to retain that job?
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of people don't talk about the fact that like they get hired and then I'll give 2 examples. The prior company I worked at, what we had done in 2 of these scenarios is we extended the probation on these people. Instead of 3 months, we extended it out to 8 months. When they came up to the 3 months, they were just told like we're extending the probation. And one of those people did not make it and the other did over the 8 month. But I feel like that's kind of the scenario. It's like you are attracted to the employer because of the price that you come in, and also because some places are just so desperate for talent. But I just don't think, I'm not going to say I don't think it's worth it. I think the structure and discipline is the best value, but I think it's almost a con to thinking that you're going to go through boot camp and that you're like golden.
I think that point you just made is probably a perfect summary of how I feel about it. A bootcamp qualification is a bootcamp qualification. Another way of going through it needn't be university. It could be a 6-month course. It could be something very like narrow and focused, or it could be something very broad. Those are very different qualifications. The fact that it's pitched as a fast track version of something else is in my opinion a bullshit spin on it. It's not that. You can't expect someone to pay for something that is a fraction, a tiny fraction of the time that something else is, and kind of hint at the fact that they might get something similar. That just seems completely fraudulent to me. It's not fair on anyone involved. Like you're saying, for the employer, it's an opportunity to be like, well, you haven't really got a solid qualification. I'll pay you, but we're going to pay you less than maybe we would anyone else, or probably less than what we would pay anyone else. And let's see if you can make it.
Well, I will say that last place I worked at, the boot camp people we hired typically were around the same pay that we would do for a co-op from university. And like, yeah, because there's a huge risk. It's like, it does have a good track record of having great people come out of it. It's too short to be at the spot of where you really should be versus like, comp sci degree. I think there is a sweet spot. We kind of talked about this in our episode. I think that not about the time, like trying to cram in like the 4-year comp sci in 2 years. I think that it can be trimmed down to more applicable to the workspace stuff.
Yep.
And less on some of the theory, in a time frame that is not going to be 6 months, but is not going to be 4 years, and would put you in a spot that you are positioned to be successful at a job without working your face off. Like, yeah, we always hear about stories like, hey, I came from boot camp, and it's like, okay, but how many additional hours did you put outside of your boot camp?
Yeah.
Like, if you're doing the boot camp and they're asking for like 15 hours a week or 30 hours a week and you're doing double that, it's like, yeah, okay, of course you're ahead. It's as if you did a year boot camp. Yes. Or if it's 8 months, you did 16 months of a boot camp.
Yep.
And you're probably at the spot where, you are 2 years into like the equivalent of like, let's say a comp sci degree. Mm-hmm. And then at that spot, it's like, okay, yeah, because you are literally at the spot I would hire co-ops coming out of university, and you're probably, enough to be safe. You're going to make it through probation, and you're just going to learn on the remaining stuff as you get into the workplace.
But the hard part as well is the stuff you mentioned now, like the learning and maintaining pace. If someone goes to bootcamp and they've been taught a very specific tool set, like some stack for front-end dev, they land, they hit the ground running. Coming out of comp sci, you are useless with modern technology 90% of the time. You understand how to implement a hash table using, I don't know, bubblegum and duct tape, but you don't know how to use Vue 3, or you don't know how to use React, or you've heard of these things, you've dabbled with them a little bit, but you've sort of been taught how to learn them, and you understand what is happening inside of a hash table? What is happening in linked? What is the DOM actually? Oh, it's just a tree that you traverse, and these things are doing like a non-visual version, and then the one gets manipulated and replaces. So conceptually, it's all there. But if I get employed, I'm going to be really slow for 3 to 6 weeks, picking up pace, learning the tools. I mean, I can cobble some stuff together and hack some things together, but it's probably not going to be right. And it'll probably do something. The bootcamp person maybe hit the ground running, and they've seen this. They've made 3 or 4 apps already. They know what to do. Cool. But then at that 6-week mark, when now it's not just the follow the template, use the scaffolding, and actually doing something beyond that, the people who've done the more formal approach or are motivated to do self-learning or something like that may be able to take it further. So I think the people who come out of bootcamp can't expect everything just to fall into place. But now I'm also assuming, because like we're saying, we don't have the context of the person who's done that.
I mean, yeah, everyone's going to be unique, but my prior experiences, I 100% agree. Like the people I come to mind that have done boot camps, when I sit them down, if I remove the exact tools that they've done in the boot camp, they will have no idea what they are doing. If I remove the frameworks from them and ask them to implement what the framework is providing them, zero idea. Even though like anyone who's experienced that they were listening would be like, well, why would you reinvent the wheel, the framework? Yeah, okay, I get that. Like, we're not asking them to do it, but like, if you had to, and that's the whole point of the framework, is I don't need to do it, someone else has done it, but it's understanding what the framework is doing behind the scenes. Because if not, you're just, once you hit a spot where you're outside the framework, or you're trying to re-implement something for the framework, or like some sort of plugin, you're going to have zero idea what the fuck anything is doing, right? Like, hey, what's this router? How's it route the request? What's the internal middleware? How's the dependency injection happen? Like all this other stuff, you're gonna be like, wait, what? What is this? But if you sit someone down, I think, who hadn't gone through the boot camp, they're more going to be learning the framework and maybe the language, but not the fundamentals of like, hey, what I'm doing here, what's happening, what's the implementation behind it. And I think that's a stronger spot to come from.
Yeah, I mean, it's not saying that people who have university educations have that. It's definitely not the case. And I will rant endlessly about the waste of time that some university assignments have, where they're like, go out and implement a database, like go write a B tree from scratch. You're like, what the hell are you doing to me? Like, this has been done so many times. Like, write a hash table, fine. It's a short, okay, at the time it didn't feel short, but it's a short exercise to get you to understand, like, what is this thing actually doing? Why is this so powerful? What the hell is going on under the hood? But like you're saying, if you remove the framework, if you took a JavaScript developer and said to them, the Lambda syntax has changed, they're going to be like, I don't care, I don't use it. Then they realize that their for each loop doesn't work anymore, because that's actually a Lambda function that's taking in the index and the value. So now it's like, hold on, there we go. Yeah, that's an interesting comment that was made there. Exactly. Why did they work and how do they work? And if I understand that, personally, I can't remember things very easily. I struggle. If you tell me 5 facts and I'm like, what? Okay, now my life depends on remembering them. I'm gonna remember like 3. But if you can explain to me why those things fit into context, or what's happening, or why they're working, I'm golden. There, I'm good to go. So I think that maybe it's a personality trait. Some people can just do it, and other people have to understand what's happening under the hood, and it slows me down, but it might be good for someone else. So yeah, it's a valid point.
I think this comment really sums up a lot of what I was kind of saying. It's like, boot camps, this thing works, and comp sci is like, I know why this works. So I'm struggling here. I'm struggling here because I'm torn between like the original question of,
is it worth it?
Yeah, like exactly.
So we can play devil's advocate here. I tried thinking about it in what context would I ever suggest to someone, go to bootcamp? If you have a ton of money, not a lot of time, and you're not sure it's for you, maybe it's a good idea. But I'm not convinced even if that's true.
Well, I would think the other thing is like, okay, what other options do we have? Which was the last one is, okay, CS degree or no CS degree, right? That's the other kind of path. And you know, I don't think I could equally recommend those paths kind of either. It's like, do you want to spend 4 years? Do you have like, and it depends where you are too. Like, you know, for those in the US, it's like, okay, do you have like $50,000 to $100,000 at least to plow into school, even if it's like state?
Yeah.
And even if you walk out of school debt free because of co-ops, like, okay, that's one thing. But and then like the no degree thing, I don't even know if I can recommend that, and that's what I did. So the boot camp, I will say, is good for people who don't have a background in computers. I think the cost is, especially if it's in installments. Like if it's like you can opt out after your first month or 2 months because you realize like this is not for you, and even if it's like a $10,000 programming for a year, let's say, and you realize, okay, you're out $2,000. That's a lot cheaper than this. At least here for the university, it's like my books my first year were almost at $1,200.
Exactly.
So
I mean, I would refer to that as like slang school fees, where you've learned something, it costs you something. It's a speeding fine or a school fee where it's not, it's a lot of money, but it's not as much as it could have been, and it corrected your course.
And the self-taught is really hard.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they're all hard, but I meant like the other have discipline and structure, like structure built into it, which is going to cause you to at least get through probably. Like for myself, it's like that would probably work well, even though I was the self-taught path. It's like I look back and I think that was just luck of being like extremely interested in that, and I want to do things, so that was the motivating factor. But for other people, they need that structure. They need to be in a scenario of like, this is the schedule. This is each week we're doing this. You show up during the Zoom calls or the in-person, whatever. And access to help is another thing. Even though the web might have all your answers, a lot of people struggle with, I don't know, how to Google for it or how to get the answers from that. So having a TA is definitely a good resource for some people.
Absolutely. Just someone to point you in the direction of which textbooks make sense. Why is this one terrible? Why does this one make sense? Because there's so much contest between them. There's so much crappy stuff out there.
And I will say that from a hiring perspective, I don't even care. I probably actually would say I raise it as a red flag if you said you were from a boot camp. It doesn't have, this is all my opinion. So it's like, there's no super credible ones. It's not like a degree where I can at least say like, look, you passed the bar of acceptance of getting into X. Like that was the criteria. And maybe some of them do, but I don't know it. So like, how would I know that Bootcamp X is like world class? I don't look at it ever.
Yeah.
And then from there, it's like, it's a red flag in the sense of, okay, how much time did you spend outside your boot camp? Did your boot camp just teach you the bare minimum and you're applying to this job because we pair up with exactly what you were taught in the boot camp? And you're going to fall like face first the moment we hire you, and we're like, oh, yeah, when you interviewed, you were for this team and it was all in JavaScript, but you're actually going to the team that's all in like Golang. You're like,
yeah, exactly. So another weird one is the bootcamps that specialize in teaching you algorithms. Now you've got the opposite problem. Someone nails the interview and they can't use a data structure to save their life, but they can solve those problems. So it's not, it just seems like it's not a tangible thing to squeeze things into a short amount of time and expect the same results. Like have decent experience of understanding why things work, how things work, and maybe how to use them. But yeah, but what you said with the reputable, like this bootcamp is worth something, this is not. I have no idea about bootcamps. I don't know. A lot of them seem to pride themselves on their name kind of internally and just go with it with straight confidence. And then we'll have things like, we've had so many students get through the doors. That's fine. That doesn't really matter. And then say something like, oh, but we cost so much money because we're providing such a high service or high quality service. That's not a rational argument either. You can't be like, oh, well, I'm charging you a ton, therefore it must be quality. So I don't know. I don't know. And I also don't know if there are boot camps that specialize in certain things. Like I've heard of the like front end boot camps, and I've heard of people going for like boot camp style training for just algorithms to get into the interviews and things like that. But I don't know if there's actual phased kind of boot camps where it's like, here's your entry level beginner boot camp that will give you enough information to decide if you're going to pursue a degree or not, or get you in the door because you're going to be a QA engineer who's not particularly involved in the active product development, but you probably want to be able to communicate with your devs. So let's give you that. I'm not aware of those kind of boot camps. So for me, they seem very, very narrow and very focused on specific things. And if you're outside of that, you're in trouble.
I talking about this, I do think that if there was a boot camp that does like site reliability engineering, I think that this might be a better situation than the coding boot camps. A lot of the more operation things is you aren't necessarily understanding these like crazy, from my experience in the operations world, you're not understanding necessarily all the time these super low level things. A lot of times you're there and you haven't even chose said thing. Like the development team has picked that, and then you're responsible to make sure it comes up and stays up, and like profiling if there is an issue and passing it back to development when there is an issue. So I think maybe that might be a sweet spot over there. I don't know of any, but you know, I know on Twitch, I think it's Mastermind does some sort of stuff. I've seen those Twitch streams. I think it's good.
Yeah.
At least from what I've seen on the Twitch streams. And I think that you could get somewhere in like 8 months. I think like a junior like DevOps role where you're doing minimal scripting, maybe some very basic Python to just automate things or output things. Some small interaction with like API, and not having to worry about like this huge like frameworks and like all this low level stuff and how this data structure is, because you're just not dealing with the scale. So you're just like, hey, look, I'm calling out to AWS API. I need to get a list of volumes to delete, and then I need to call it delete. Like, you know,
that's it. That seems, like you said, is a very plausible place to have these people qualified. Like I would probably sign up for that kind of bootcamp, just from if it wasn't a full-time situation and they offered something like what you said Mastermind does. This is AWS. Let's go through the API. What is a VM? What is a storage volume? What does a block volume do? How are they attached? What's happening? Those are useful skills that could be learned in that amount of time, and you could be a very qualified operations person because of that, if the space is using that. So yeah, there's...
It's weird though, right? Because I see this more on the operations side, but like certifications, and like people show up with that, and I'm like, oh, fuck, like +1 for them, right? Like, but on the development side, there's not really a certification of like data structure or like not that I know of. I've never had anyone present like, hey, listen, I did the X course on Y, therefore I'm like solid on whatever.
Yep.
So yeah,
it's weird you said that, because when I was job hunting recently, I used Hired as a mechanism, and they have a questionnaire, like, give us your background, and then they like, here, do a skills assessment, and they compare you to other people who did the skills assessment test, and it's just one algorithm question or two algorithm questions, and they look at how correct you got it and how long it took you, and you have, I think, 48 hours to redo the test if you choose to. And that served as a, hey, this is what I did compared to everyone else. But there is no standardized bar where you can be like, well, which sucks about our profession, because other industries often have it. You're a veterinarian or a doctor or lawyer or accountant, you've got these credentials and certifications. You can get a lot of them and be terrible. You can really be terrible at what you do, or just forget it because it doesn't hold relevance. So yeah, but I'm still struggling to think of the way boot camps are right now. I would love to actually go through a process or chat with someone who's been through the entirety of it and understand what they were learned, what they were taught, what they learned, and what they were told the purpose of each of the things were. Because that's the interesting part.
I can speak from the perspective of being on the shadows of when my wife went through it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, like they cover some of the low level stuff, but I mean, it's like you don't understand what okay, I will listen and I'm like, okay, that makes sense. But then I will put myself in the shoes of someone who's not done this for like 10 years. And I'm like, no one's going to understand what you're talking about. Like, yeah, you said it, and you said that in your boot camp you've covered the call stack in JavaScript, for example, and how it works.
Mm-hmm.
But if I went back to those people and asked them, like, how does it work, and could you describe it? I don't think anyone that I could see in that boot camp, because I had watched a couple of these lectures, would be able to really explain it to me. So, yeah, and okay, the other stuff is like, there's the scam boot camps, which are like, and I guess that's subjective of what you want to declare as scam, but it's like, hey, sign up and listen, no cost, but we take like 40% of your salary for like 5 years, with like, and they have a payout clause or a buyout clause that they always say. I like it and I don't like it. I like it because it doesn't put any restriction on anyone. Like, you could literally have zero job and apply for that, and you're like, fuck it, right? Like, it doesn't cost me anything except my time. But then equally, I look at it, I'm like, okay, what about the people who like do get a good salary and do pay way more than they could outright just have done like a CS degree or something? I don't know. Like, that model is good and bad.
It is scary. The pay for what you want model is, oh sorry, not pay for what you want. Don't pay us anything and we will get it back from you later. Scares the crap out of me because you're not informed at all about the cost of or your worth, because you don't know what you're going to be worth when you're done with it. So for them to be like, come join our bootcamp, we'll take 40% of your salary. If you don't have money, that's amazing. 60% of a salary is great. That's awesome. You have no barrier of entry, you're good to go. Their motivation is non-existent because they're doing a group setting anyway. They're not really, the cost per head is minuscule, especially if it's online. So what do you even do? You join and you say like, okay, fine, I'll do this and then I'll buy myself out if it turns out that you guys are making way more money off of me than I should be, or something like that. So that is a nice mechanism, but it doesn't feel like it's incentivized on their side correctly. Like, they're happy to get you jobs, but would they really invest extra time to make sure that you're getting $100,000 a year versus 40? Why? If they can just churn out 3 more people, it doesn't matter. So yeah, that's the thinking, but I
don't know if there's one, but I think the spot that, okay, I also asked this because one day I want to start boot camp.
Okay.
I think, like I said, I think there's a spot that's missed. I think, I don't even want to call it boot camp because of all this whole topic, but I think the 6 to 8 months stuff is too short, without like crazy amount of time, right? Like, okay, if you're willing to put in more time and it's like literally 40 hours and like you live, breathe, sleep, and then there's exercises on top of that, okay, maybe you could get to the spot that's like really solid. And the model was literally like, okay, you have some sort of deposit to weed out people who just sign up for the sake of like, okay, you sign up and you fill a spot. right? Because that takes away some resources. Even if it's a group setting, it's like you still need to support those people and whatnot, right? Like time and registration. And the main takeaway of it was going to be 100% refundable if you don't get a job in X time over Y pay.
That's an interesting one. The clause, the over Y pay clause, is an interesting one because you can promise people a dev job. You can promise people tech. Tech is a blue and white collared job where there are places where you will work and you will make the same money as anyone else doing any normal blue collar job. And then there are places where we will work where it's expertise.
And I actually I thought about that. And then like the other model was kind of like the complete opposite, which is, okay, 0, nothing, but it's some percent of whatever. Because like if you show up and you say, okay, like you have a dev job in a year from when you complete the course, granted you follow blah blah conditionally, you actually show that you apply to jobs, right? And over Y amount or fully refund it, but then the course is going to be substantial, right? Because it's the only way you could justify and have this type of course to get candidates at the level they need to be to actually have it run. But then the argument I always have with people is like, oh, if you do that, let's say it was $15,000, $20,000, whatever amount, right? So some high amount compared to other courses. People go, yeah, but then you price out anyone who doesn't have that cash to do it.
Yeah.
And then that's why I always said, like, I liked the models where they take a cut of salary, but I also don't like them because they tend to be scammy, I feel. So I don't know if the idea is just offer both, and then like you just cater to both parties, where it's like, listen, if you can't afford it, you go the other way. There's no real cost. If you do have the capital, then opt to the other way, and if you can't get a job, then you just get refunded.
Well, in an ideal sense, you can think of it as you need no experience at all. Come in, you pay nothing. If you pass, if you start failing, you have a certain sliding window of time at which you have to return to a non-failing grade. We have a list of companies who are willing to employ you at this salary, and we will take this percentage from that salary, guaranteed. So it's almost like you're becoming an internal trainer for a company or for a set of companies and saying, we will train DevOps engineers to be able to achieve this. And I use DevOps just because I believe you can get to a place of making money without having to understand the how do I phrase it? There are dev positions, but I think the current boot camps are trying to cater for that, where it's like, come in, learn this web framework, learn this front end, learn that, like whatever, full stack. The irony for me as well is full stack is, in my opinion, what I did at university plus more. And these people are going, come to us and we'll do a full stack boot camp. Holy shit. How are you going to do more than a degree in a...
Andre, the boot camp full stack just means you're going to write JavaScript. That's literally what they mean. You're going to write JavaScript so you can write backend
and front end. There we go. Okay. That makes more sense.
That is my takeaway when people say that they're full stack. Rarely do I meet anyone who's even confident, even on a moderate level in both. It is usually quite skewed. And I'll honestly say that the trend I see right now is people say they're full stack. They're like 90% front end and 10% they can go in and write some back end, like modify endpoints and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which case is like, okay, no, you're a front end dev. And the other flip side is companies want that because then they can hire you that and say like, okay, today you're writing back end, tomorrow you're writing front end. Like you didn't take a specialization. You're not just a back end dev. So you can't say like, that's not my job. Well, it is now. What I will say on what you were saying is, I don't know why companies don't do kind of what you said in the sense of we companies are very good at spending money sending people to conferences. I have never had anyone come in for like a real training session at a company where it was like, look, we're just going to hire someone who comes in for a week and ramps you up on Kubernetes, like 5 people in a room, and we just ramp you up on Kubernetes, and you're good to go after that, to the point of like whatever the company needs, right? Like whatever is reasonable in that time frame, right? You're not going to be a master of all, but you're at the spot where you're actually not totally lost. And I never see this. I see companies offer resources of like, here's a O'Reilly subscription, we'll pay you to do an online like Udemy course, but almost never like in-person training. But then we'll spend $1,500 on tickets to conferences. I mean, prior to COVID, plus hotels, plus time off doing the conference. And to be honest, most people just like go to like, yeah, exactly. Like the AWS conference is popular, no offense to AWS, because people go because they have fucking awesome parties. Like that's why most people I know want to go to that conference. It is nothing to do with learning the tech. It is zero to do with like any of the sessions for the most part, because they're all online afterwards. Like,
yeah, exactly that. There's networking to be had. There's those sorts of things, but it's not.
The networking is even worse because you go there, and the networking is mostly recruiters who just want to hire you away from your company anyways. Like
exactly that. Yeah, no, that's exactly it. So, I mean, the boot camping, I've heard people say that there's network opportunities there.
True.
I don't know. I don't know, because if we're saying 1 out of 10 people we've encountered coming out of bootcamp, or in your example, coming out of bootcamp is getting somewhere, that's not a fantastic odds with your networking either. So where do you find yourself?
Well, I would say that it's not that 1 out of 10 are not like are getting somewhere and the other aren't. I'm saying like 7 out of 10. I would say 7 out of 10 struggle once they're hired.
Okay, but then get kind of moving,
or they get canned or whatever, or the probation gets extended, right? Because I had never had that happen before. Like prior hiring of devs and like the co-ops are set terms. I've never had scenarios of extending probation periods until I start, at a prior company working with like people who've gone through boot camps, and it was just clear like, okay, you know a very precise thing, great, but that precise thing is not what we do. And it's like, okay. So the networking on the candidate side is good, because if you have someone who is going to basically iron you out and prep you to be able to get in front of companies, or already have a pipeline of companies that they have already worked with, and they're just like, interview at these 5 companies, you're done. And the worst thing is, what those companies are going to expect. Like, you have to do some level of work as a boot camp. You need to find partners, and then you're going to need to know what those partners expect, what those partners are technologies are, what they're looking for, what their hiring is, so that you can have your candidates get through, so you can go back and hire another group of people. Say like, look, 95% of our course candidates are placed within whatever, a year of after they finish the course. The follow-up question that people need to ask is, what was the median salary of the people who got placed, and how many people still have that job or like completed their probation of their job? Because like, you could place 95% of your people, and you could have like a very tiny percent actually have the job, like keep the job.
True.
True.
That's exactly it. And I think the model you're talking about with having these partners who say like, we're ready to accept people coming from you, you're moving into the domain of what universities do. That's exactly how they operate. Their syllabuses are dictated to some extent. There's no way of having them survive unless people are getting jobs or contributing to academia. So that's it. The idea of being like I would have no objection if I imagine being in a situation where I cannot afford to go somewhere and someone says to me, come to us, we will train you, we will provide you with a job, and your job will be somewhere within this range based on the qualifications you have. Go ahead. Use that as a motivator to try and strive to be a little bit better. Because you will have potentially, I know people have lives and can't put in 10 hours more, but use that as a barometer and say, like, I am happy with whatever it is they're going to offer me when I get done. That's cool. But also understand it's not the, you can't leave and be like, oh, cool, you have this qualification, I have this bootcamp qualification, we're good to go. Your learning process has just started. You don't have a foundation on which, I mean, you have a foundation. It's just a very alternative foundation compared to what everyone's normally encountering. If you land a job and your manager has a degree background, now you're in shit because there's an expectation for like myself. I've been in many situations where the expectation is simple, that there is a bug in this code, fix it. And someone goes, here's the repository. It could be a language you've never seen. You have 2 weeks, figure it out. Like you don't have the luxury of staying in your lane. You can't just be like, I've had to jump between Java, Go, and Python in a day, and the expectation is you know how to code, you understand the foundations, you understand the fundamentals, get it done. That's not the kind of thing that perhaps someone coming out of a bootcamp would be able to do. With that said, if someone came to me and goes, our front end just fell over because we try to do this, there's a bug somewhere in this, whatever, fix it. Okay, cool. I'm now going to try and understand how the framework works before I can fix it. So it's possibly an expectation exercise that has to be had on both sides. Like, don't expect to be able to compete on the breadth of a person who's got a degree and in the depth in certain areas, and don't expect a person who's not out of bootcamp to be able to just know this domain 100%. So, yeah.
I think I've come to the conclusion of where I think bootcamps are worth it.
Mm-hmm.
I think, assuming you can find a job,
mm-hmm.
if you honestly, and you don't hate development, like, okay, if you go through this and you realize, like, this is the worst thing ever, like, I don't want to be doing this, then obviously this is not going to work. Like, you're just going to have nervous breakdown and hate life, and no money's worth that. So,
yes.
I think if you're in a spot where you honestly probably make less than $60,000 a year,
mm-hmm.
and you can either get into a boot camp, even with the sketchy 40%,
mm-hmm.
or whatever the cut is, or you have the capital without, like, listen, you have to, like, not live in an apartment, sleep in your car, and you are able to scrape up the money to go to the boot camp, and you know yourself well enough that you can follow through.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're not just going to quit, and all you need is the structure to be in place. Even if you go there, and even if you complete the boot camp and you can't find work, but it takes you even a year, even 2 years after that to actually find something, I think at that point it's still worth it. Mm-hmm. Unless you're on, like, super career projection in your current job. Like, okay, you're making, like, I don't know, $30,000 a year, and you think, okay, but listen, if I sweat it out for 5 years, I'm going to be making 80,000. Then you probably you have a stable path you could go down to. And if you're not looking into computer science and you have no interest in that, and you're happy doing what you're doing, okay, then do that. I think there are a lot of people who are stuck in spots that they don't have the funds to necessarily go to university.
Mm-hmm.
They are honestly in shit jobs.
Mm.
Like, I don't think there's anything sexy about flipping burgers at McDonald's. It is a job.
Mm-hmm.
It pays your bills, I am sure. But I don't
Yeah. think
I've ever met anyone who works there who told me, like, this is what they wake up every morning wanting to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think there is definitely a spot there. Like, I even if you go in and you finish it and you get hired at quote unquote like the worst spots
Mm-hmm.
in development where they just work you and they don't even pay you for your overtime, you are
Mm-hmm.
probably still in a better spot than minimum wage.
Yeah, there's it's a mechanism. It is a mechanism to get you to something, to the next level. It's exactly that. And I think you're 100% right that there is a place, and it's based on your resources, both financially and time. Your, like, there are people, many people I was in school with when I started, who quit because they couldn't do it. They just, for all the time they invested, they just could not grasp certain concepts that were foundational, and they just couldn't get it. Perhaps with additional help they could have, and maybe that happened. Others just went, this is insane. I'm beating my head against the keyboard every waking hour. I go to bed thinking about the problems I can't solve, and then I wake up and panic about them. I'm done. And they know they can do the work, but they're just not interested in it. So bootcamp can give you that early signal as well. Like, this is not.
And the cost is relatively low to what I see. Like, okay, I don't know all boot camps, but you know, if most boot camps are 10 grand for the full thing, and if you can opt out in a quarter payment, so $2,500. And I know this is a lot of money for people in the scenario that I just gave, but that is a lot better than you have decided that you want to go down, I don't know, pick a degree.
Yeah.
And you've done your first year and you realize, wow, I don't have anything for this after the 1 year.
Yep.
Like there's nothing.
No.
Like the knowledge you learned, yeah. But I mean, an employer is not going to
a fractional degree doesn't count.
You have a bachelor, you have 1 year of courses that are related to bachelor of like whatever, and cool. And now you have $10,000. And if you actually want to complete it, not get a job, it's to complete it, you have 3 more years and the additional cost of 3 more years to do that. Versus a boot camp, like, you know, I think you even if you spent the year and you realize, okay, this isn't like, this boot camp did not prepare me necessarily what I need. I can't get a job from this point. Like, or I'm going to have a hard time getting a job from this point. You still have some of the tools to start on GitHub. You could actually start building out a portfolio. You could find some probably freelance work. It's probably not going to pay great, but it's something to get exposure.
Something there.
You know, no one is going to show up with a qualification, or you could walk away, that says like, hey, you didn't have a degree, too bad. But like, you know, like a librarian, like here, you need a degree. You need a bachelor's. You can't have done 1 year in something and said like, look, I would like to work as a librarian. And sorry, too bad. You need, I think it's a minimum bachelor's of English to be a librarian. Like,
there's it's also strange to me because the process or the thoughts are exactly what I think, in line with what you're saying, where a bootcamp is a completed thing in a short amount of time. So yes, it's condensed, but like you're saying, if you come out of it as a fraction, you've learned something of it. But if you just grind to the end of it, you have something. You at least have a portfolio, even if it's the assignments that people handhold you through or something like that. You can move to some position of like freelancing. It could be something very
you can also use it in other jobs. Like I've seen people who've learned some basic coding and then find ways to just kind of automate their jobs, or at least workflow at their current jobs. And then you look like okay, yeah, you can't get hired as a dev yet, but you look like a superstar at your current job. Like usually these people are usually analysts or whatnot, like business analysts. So either you've improved because you learned SQL, or you've improved because now you can write something in some sort of code that interacts with XYZ that other business analysts couldn't.
Yep.
So you're not just stuck in the world of Excel anymore. So now you could pull things out, extract data from other sources, like, and that might be the gateway to either you don't go down development path, but you move up the ladder in your existing career. Great. Yep. I don't know. Like, I think that the true thing is this: today's topic, starting a coding bootcamp course.
There we go. That's yeah. It's weird because I was just thinking, if someone said to me they've come from a bootcamp and we learned Python, practical amounts of Python, that person is a perfect addition in a non-tech company to help automate, to help implement various systems that could be very, very useful. Like make a Flask app that captures people's leave requests, PDO requests. Amazing. You look like a wizard amongst the rest of the people who aren't devs there. That could be a terrific place for you.
I do think there is a handful of places already that if you are working, that you could do something like this and greatly improve your quality of life in terms of your job.
Yep.
And I'd say the easiest fields I see is if you're in IT, like support IT, like corp IT, then you already have a lot of computer knowledge and whatnot. So I look at this. The other thing I was going to say, and I think is probably the most underrated field, is finance.
Yeah.
Or like payroll.
Any of those things. An ex-colleague of mine at Amazon a long, long time ago, his fiance sat him down and said, you undervalue the stuff you're doing, because he helped her with, I think she was in real estate, and he helped her write some automation scripts just to do basic, here's like web scraping. Go and find me some stuff and off we go. And she said, like, your value, what you just did might seem very trivial from a technical aspect, but it's insane. You've just saved us many, many hours. You've essentially replaced a person, which sucks because now we're getting into that space, but you've replaced a person with this machine, and that's it. And it's interesting because could you make like a hacker bootcamp, not from the security perspective, but let's do a basic Python script that handles Excel spreadsheets. Let's make a super simple Flask app that does some capturing of information. Let's make something that is a basic UI. It could be web or not. And there we go. You can produce, it might be shitty, but if you become the implementer of something that another business person could have.
Yeah.
I want to automate.
It's shitty from like a developer standpoint, but it's practical for the people who are doing that, because they aren't devs. They aren't in a scenario where they're writing like customer facing things. And if the business is big enough that this does start as a hack of like, hey, we put together whatever, someone else in development is eventually going to take it over because it becomes too reliant on it and like whatever. This actually happened at the last company I worked at. They, what was it? There was some business analyst or someone maybe in payroll who hacks together some sort of Excel thing. I know what it is. They were in a risk and fraud department, and they were very knowledgeable in Excel. Like, man, they were able to actually build a full chat application in Excel so that they could real-time collaborate with their different Excel sheets with chat.
That's awesome.
Eventually it became so like critical enough that they moved away from that, and like someone internally built tools around this so that they didn't need to do it. But it just reminded me of this. I think the other thing was like, what was it? The badges to scan to the turnstiles. Someone had done some hack on this who wasn't dev, and then the company started using this to track like time to report to the government for like research and development grants and things like this. Like individual teams who are research teams, this was prior to COVID. So every time you're in the office, you were on the research team. So all your hours could be compiled into basically these tax credits. And the way that they would prove it is they had a script that would basically pull this out. Eventually became so critical to the company that like it was no longer this sketchy like Excel thing that goes out and gets the data. It became an actual app.
That's it. But it's going to be either employ someone at a low rate. I say that because they've gotten no experience and they've not gone through the formal training part. So the company's taking on the risk there. But either have them do these apps in a very controlled fashion, or have someone hacking it together who's not in IT at all and has no background at all. So your question of starting a code bootcamp, perhaps that's it. Instill a mindset of automation and allow people to become more kind of engineering minded, whether they're going to go into dev or not. You don't have to change your job. You could be a salesperson. You could be a real estate person or whatever the case is. You've got data. If you've got data and it's stored on a computer, you could probably benefit from a custom script. And Excel, you can do amazing things, but it's not necessarily designed to do that. And it's harder. Like that automating the boring stuff in Python textbook is great because it's exactly that. Like instilling that kind of way of doing it may get you a lot further than a bootcamp that tells you about version 2.1 of this front end stack that can't go beyond that. Because when you encounter an error, you have no idea what the hell it is telling you because you don't understand what's going on. You haven't got that kind of curiosity, perhaps. So yeah, that's my rant, but it's all based on my perspective of never having done a bootcamp and never attending one. Maybe if someone feels like they strongly disagree, I would love to see what the syllabus is and see what the quality is like.
Right after this, I'm going to go downstairs. My wife's going to be like, you're totally wrong.
Both of you, I'm not talking to you anymore. You're dead to me. Yeah.
Well, I mean, like that's one funny thing is like leave it to devs to have opinions on things that they've never done.
Yeah.
Like everyone always jokes that's like a dev will read something like, I don't know, farming.
Yeah.
And you're like, I could automate that. Yeah. Like I'll go in and automate that with no prior experience or anything.
Nope.
We'll just come in thinking like, well, it's just a problem. I've solved many other problems. I must be able, like I've solved other problems. I must be able to solve this. I thought this comment was probably a good comment to like.
Bootcamp's work if the position is tailored to fit those skills. Expectations should be set accordingly. Yeah. Otherwise, all parties. That's exactly it. If I was doing a startup and I was bootstrapping it myself and I'm like, crap, I've got 20 grand max. And I approached someone from Bootcamp and said to them, I'm not going to employ you on a time basis. How much is it going to cost me to get this done? And they go, cool, it's going to be 20 grand. That's who I'm going to go to. I've had people approach me going, oh, I've got this startup idea. We're looking for an MVP or like an MVP of this Android app. Like, I am not the person you want to employ. I don't know Android. I'm going to charge you too much and I'm going to be overly opinionated. And I'm going to make something that scales to 1 million people before we even know that we have 100. So no, the expectations aren't in alignment in the other direction. But that's an awesome comment, yeah.
Yep. And on what you were saying, the funny thing is we inherit that. Because it's always like, how's this code like this? Well, it was all written by employee number 1 who, just had to hack things and get things out the door. That was it, right?
That's exactly it. Legacy software, again, every time we have to get back to legacy. But
the bootcamp skip legacy. Therefore, they can't be good. They broke our rule.
There's exactly rule number 1. You have to have worked with legacy software. Otherwise, you haven't suffered enough. So that is an interesting point. That's a very interesting one. A bootcamp that sends someone out with a commit to a functional piece of open source software. That is a credential I would be happy to back. I would be impressed by that.
The only thing I can think of that is somewhat similar. Google's summer coding camp, is it called?
I think so. I think
Summer
so.
coding camp is what I'm going to go with.
Is it Summer of Code or something like that?
Something like that.
Yeah.
But that isn't for non-devs.
Mhm.
I think that is for
That's for
devs,
devs.
right?
Yeah.
And usually it's for students.
If you come out and you can tell me, I mean, I'm going to be impressed. If you come out and tell me like, hey, I made this commit to, if it's a library I'm using, I'm going to be very, very impressed. If you can tell me, if you found the bug, reported it, fixed it with a PR, and got it merged, you're immediately like, I'm 100% invested in understanding how you did that, because I've never achieved that feat myself. So yeah,
I do think having something where you work on a group project that is open source and having each of your own individual components might be a good starting point, because like if it's not more than a year, a course to get someone to actively contribute onto open source is going to be hard.
Very.
Because all your time is spent ramping up on like understanding of what you're even doing and how these tools work, and even getting like installing things and how's everything set up and what is Git and how do I use Git and all this. And then you get on an open source project, like understanding the context of open source projects themselves is like a whole other thing. Like trying to find a task to actually pick up that you could do is, open source authors will say like, we're always open for contributions, but from the outside, it is extremely hard, extremely hard. Even active products I use day in, day out as a tool, I don't even feel comfortable going in and actually trying to make a change, because usually they're so vast.
Yep.
Like I've read some of the open source tickets that are marked as like for beginners, and I read them like, I don't even know where to start.
No, exactly.
Like,
exactly. So that's it. I mean, that is a very, very, very high bar.
And the problem is like open source contribution that you made to another repo where you just updated the README file doesn't count. Like,
that's the whole Hacktoberfest situation that's coming up next month, where you get the list of repos where it's like, just add your name here and you get a commit. That's not really the one, but okay. But yeah, okay.
That's good.
I think we need to find someone to argue against this. Who's yeah.
So we need to end and see what my wife thinks, and then next week bring her on.
I look forward to the YouTube comments.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
Awesome.
We'll end it there.